Part 1. You will hear a woman talking on a phone with a help desk assistant about a cooking workshop. First, you have some time to read questions 1 to 6. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Hello, good morning. This is City Visitor Help Desk. Tom speaking. How can I help you today?
Hello, Tom. I'm here on a short trip and I'd like some information about local cooking workshops. I've heard there are great one-day lessons for newcomers, but I'm not sure where to start.
You've definitely come to the right place. This city is known for its culinary schools that welcome both residents and visitors. There are a few notable courses I'd be happy to recommend.
Great! I really want something that focuses on local, fresh produce. Also, if they cover a bit about how to select ingredients, that would be ideal.
In that case, let's begin with a popular workshop called Rosewood's Kitchen Table. They do group demonstrations on using seasonal fruits, dairy and herbs. More importantly, they teach people exactly how to gather the right items from local greengrocers before the cooking even starts.
Sounds perfect. Do they limit the size of their classes?
They do keep their sessions fairly small, fewer than 12 participants typically. They also offer personalised sessions for anyone wanting undivided attention. That's useful if, for instance, you have specific dietary goals or you're trying to master a single technique.
Exactly. Do you know if they offer any special deals for repeat customers?
They certainly do. If you decide you want to book another class in the future, whether next week or next month, you get a 25% discount off the second booking. It's quite popular, especially among visitors who extend their stays. And to make matters even better, another option I recommend is Henderson's Culinary Club. Their main focus is on teaching people to cook nutritious meals, though not necessarily dieting. They tackle balanced eating and highlight recipes that are good for general wellness.
So it's not just about losing weight, but more about overall health, right?
Correct. One fascinating aspect is that they pay special attention to your ligaments. Some of their recipes include ingredients that help keep your joints and connective tissues in good shape. It's a fairly unique approach, actually.
That is interesting. How can I learn more?
They hold a free seminar every Monday evening at their main building. You don't have to reserve in advance. Just turn up around 5:45 p.m. for the 6 p.m. talk. That's a good chance to see if you'd like any of their paid classes.
Wonderful. I might drop in.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to read questions 7 to 10. Now listen carefully and answer questions 7 to 10.
So, moving on, can you tell me about the next school, please?
The next school I'd suggest is known as the Montaro Institute, spelled M-O-N-T-A-R-O, if you see it listed anywhere.
I've heard the name mentioned in a cafe this morning, actually. What do they specialize in?
They do cover an array of techniques, from filleting fish to baking, but they're widely recognised for their expertise in plant-based dishes. They've noticed a growing demand for meat-free cooking, so many of their workshops centre on vegetarian and vegan methods.
Perfect. Many of my friends are vegetarian, so it'd be nice to pick up some new ideas. Are they centrally located?
Yes, they're near the big harbourside complex. Lots of fresh produce vendors are close by. The Montaro Institute often sends students right out to those stalls to pick up daily specials.
That's convenient. Do they have any advanced sessions for those more accustomed to cooking?
They do. In fact, they host a popular workshop on professional kitchen utensils, covering everything from specialised graters and slicers to handling a proper scissors technique for trimming delicate herbs or cutting certain poultry cuts. These classes fill up fast, so I recommend booking online if you're interested.
That sounds fantastic, Tom. Thank you for all this information.
You're most welcome, Debbie. Feel free to pop in again or give us a call if you have more questions.
That is the end of part 1. You now have some time to check your answers. Now turn to part 2. Part 2. You will hear a woman presenting a seminar on different ways to keep fit. First, you have some time to read questions 11 to 16. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Clarice Narborough, and welcome to our mid-semester health seminar here at Westvale University. In this segment, I want to touch upon how you might choose an exercise routine that works in harmony with both your daily schedule and academic or professional commitments. To begin with, one of the first questions you need to ask yourself is whether or not a specialized facility, such as a state-of-the-art fitness center, is a practical option for you. Many individuals do sign up because they crave structured training apparatuses, an environment where other members are pushing themselves, and perhaps amenities like steam rooms or swimming pools. If you can coordinate your schedule and genuinely devote time to consistent workouts, you might notice fast results in both muscular development and overall endurance. However, do remember that certain gyms have peak hour congestion, which might make your workout less efficient if you can only arrive during the busiest times. Now, if the idea of stepping onto a treadmill in a crowded space doesn't entice you, consider the simple yet powerful act of running outdoors. One compelling argument in favor of jogging is that it caters to those who aren't necessarily at the pinnacle of athletic proficiency. Even novices who struggle to run a single city block can build up stamina incrementally by alternating short jogs with brisk walking. This progressive approach demonstrates that forward level is unusual for those starting out, as the main hurdle is merely finding the courage to lace up and begin. Then there's the option of swimming, which often appeals to those seeking an exercise that can be pursued year-round. Indoor aquatic centres, with their climate-controlled atmospheres, make it possible to practice your stroke technique whether it's a scorching summer or a frigid winter. That is why many swimmers praise it as not limited by season. Of course, not everyone relishes repetitive lap swimming. If you're hoping to chat with a partner during the session, you might be disappointed. So, another excellent cardiovascular workout is cycling. In just the last 5 years, it has experienced a surge in popularity around our campus, partly due to the scenic trails weaving through the arboretum and local farmland. While riding an exercise bike indoors may suffice for basic conditioning, many prefer venturing outside, breathing fresh air, and taking in diverse landscapes. At its best, cycling can be highly enjoyable, especially when undertaken under pleasant weather and moderate traffic conditions. However, you'd need to remain aware of road safety regulations, proper helmet usage, and possibly invest in a reliable bike that suits your height and posture. Now, let us explore an activity often considered more holistic: yoga. The modern adaptation of yoga blends strength work, flexibility training, and mindfulness, making it an appealing choice for those desiring physical benefits alongside stress reduction. One of its main advantages is how instructors frequently emphasize alignment and measured progression, limiting the chance of strains or accidental overexertion. As a result, many experts classify yoga as having a relatively regular injury risk, provided that certified professionals guide you. If personalized guidance is more your style, it might be worth hiring a dedicated trainer. For some, the presence of a coach can transform a tedious or confusing workout routine into something purposeful and consistent. A personal trainer can keep track of your performance metrics, design incremental improvements, and even adapt sessions based on your energy levels or injuries. The essential benefit here is that a reliable guide it keeps you motivated when you feel uninspired by monotonous routines.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to read questions 17 to 20. Now listen carefully and answer question 17 to 20. Now listen carefully and answer question 17 to 20.
As we go ahead, at this stage you might wonder why so many people discontinue their fitness endeavours, especially after that initial burst of enthusiasm. While some blame scheduling conflicts or financial strain, the real culprits often lie elsewhere. When gym-goers don't perceive tangible improvements quickly or feel overshadowed by others who appear more fit, they experience loss of confidence with sagging self-belief. Skipping just a few sessions can turn into a habit. especially if they become convinced they'll never attain the level of excellence they once envisioned. Another stumbling block is that novices frequently underestimate the persistent grit required to maintain a strict regimen. Some discover it demands needing too much effort in the long run, and that realization drains their motivation. Without accountability or genuine passion, it's all too easy to relegate the workout plan to the bottom of one's to-do list. To combat these pitfalls, experts suggest employing thoughtful goal-setting techniques. Avoid establishing lofty targets that may be unachievable within a realistic timeframe. Instead, consider moderate checkpoints, something that both challenges you and recognizes your starting point. In essence, keep your goals realistic so you can track tangible progress without the crushing disappointment of unmet promises. Furthermore, you might benefit from small but gratifying incentives whenever you pass a milestone. Perhaps, upon improving your mile time or successfully mastering an advanced yoga posture, you decide to reward yourself with a well-earned treat, like a favorite meal, a relaxing weekend getaway, or a purchase you've been postponing. This positive feedback loop can spark fresh motivation and help ensure that the process becomes an enjoyable journey rather than an obligatory chore.
That is the end of part 2. You now have some time to check your answers. Now turn to part 3. Part 3. You will hear a student called Joanna talking to her tutor about her research. First, you have some time to read questions 21 to 26. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Hi, Joanna. Good to meet you. Now, before we discuss your new research project, I'd like to hear something about the psychology study you did last year for your master's degree. So, how did you choose your subjects for that?
Well, I had 6 subjects, all professional musicians and all female. 3 were violinists, and there was also a cello player and a pianist and a flute player. They were all very highly regarded in the music world, and they'd done quite extensive tours in different continents, and quite a few had won prizes and competitions as well.
And they were quite young, weren't they?
Yes, between 25 and 29. The mean was 27.8. I wasn't specifically looking for artists who'd produced recordings, but this is something that's just taken for granted these days, and they all had.
Right. Now, you collected your data through telephone interviews, didn't you?
Yes. I realised if I was going to interview leading musicians, it'd only be possible over the phone because they're so busy. I recorded them using a telephone recording adapter. I'd been worried about the quality, but it worked out all right. I managed at least a 30-minute interview with each subject, sometimes longer.
Did doing it on the phone make it more stressful?
I'd thought it might. It was all quite informal, though, and in fact they seemed very keen to talk. And I don't think using the phone meant I got less rich data. Rather the opposite, in fact.
Interesting. And you were looking at how performers dress for concert performances?
That's right. My research investigated the way players see their role as a musician and how this is linked to the type of clothing they decide to wear. But that focus didn't emerge immediately. When I started, I was more interested in trying to investigate the impact of what was worn on those listening, and also whether someone like a violinist might adopt a different style of clothing from, say, someone playing the flute or the trumpet.
It's interesting that the choice of dress is up to the individual, isn't it?
Yes, you'd expect there to be rules about it in orchestras, but that's quite rare.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to read questions 27 to 30. Now listen carefully and answer questions 27 to 30.
You only had women performers in your study. Was that because male musicians are less worried about fashion?
I think a lot of the men are very much influenced by fashion, but in social terms, the choices they have are more limited. They'd really upset audiences if they strayed away from quite narrow boundaries.
Now, popular music has quite different expectations. Did you read Mike Frost's article about the dress of women performers in popular music?
No.
Well, he points out that a lot of female singers and musicians in popular music tend to dress down in performances and wear less feminine clothes, like jeans instead of skirts. And he suggests this is because otherwise they'd just be discounted as trivial.
But you could argue they're just wearing what's practical. I mean, a pop music concert is usually a pretty energetic affair.
Yes, he doesn't make that point, but I think you're probably right. I was interested by the effect of the audience at a musical performance when it came to the choice of dress.
The subjects I interviewed felt this was really important. It's all to do with what we understand by performance as a public event. They believed the audience had certain expectations, and it was up to them as performers to fulfill these expectations, to show a kind of esteem.
They weren't afraid of looking as if they'd made an effort to look good.
I think in the past, the audience would have had those expectations of one another too, but that's not really the case now. Not in the UK, anyway.
No.
And I also got interested in what sports scientists are doing too, with regard to clothing.
Musicians are quite vulnerable physically, aren't they? Because the movements they carry out are very intensive and repetitive, so I'd imagine some features of sports clothing could safeguard the players from the potentially dangerous effects of this sort of thing.
Yes, but musicians don't really consider it. They avoid clothing that obviously restricts their movements, but that's as far as they go.
Anyway, coming back to your own research, do you have any idea where you're going from here?
I was thinking of doing a study using an audience, including...
That is the end of part 3. You now have some time to check your answers. Now turn to part 4. Part 4. You will hear part of a lecture about research on ethnography in business. First, you have some time to read questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
So, what I'm going to talk about to you today is something called ethnography. This is a type of research aimed at exploring the way human cultures work. It was first developed for use in anthropology, and it's also been used in sociology and communication studies. So, what's it got to do with business, you may ask? Well, businesses are finding that ethnography can offer them deeper insight into the possible needs of customers, either present or future, as well as providing valuable information about their attitudes towards existing products. And ethnography can also help companies to design new products or services that customers really want. Let's look at some examples of how ethnographic research works in business. One team of researchers did a project for a company manufacturing kitchen equipment. They watched how cooks used measuring cups to measure out things like sugar and flour. They saw that the cooks had to check and recheck the contents because although the measuring cups had numbers inside them, the cooks couldn't see these easily. So a new design of cup was developed to overcome this problem, and it was a top seller. Another team of ethnographic researchers looked at how cell phones were used in Uganda, in Africa. They found that people who didn't have their own phones could pay to use the phones of local entrepreneurs. Because these customers paid in advance for their calls, they were eager to know how much time they'd spent on the call so far. So the phone company designed phones for use globally with this added feature. Ethnographic research has also been carried out in computer companies. In one company, IT systems administrators were observed for several weeks. It was found that a large amount of their work involved communicating with colleagues in order to solve problems, but that they didn't have a standard way of exchanging information from spreadsheets and so on. So, the team came up with an idea for software that would help them to do this. In another piece of research, a team observed and talked to nurses working in hospitals. This led to the recognition that the nurses needed to access the computer records of their patients no matter where they were. This led to the development of a portable computer tablet that allowed the nurses to check records in locations throughout the hospital. Occasionally, research can be done even in environments where the researchers can't be present. For example, in one project done for an airline, respondents used their smartphones to record information during airline trips, in a study aiming at tracking the emotions of passengers during a flight. So, what makes studies like these different from ordinary research? Let's look at some of the general principles behind ethnographic research in business. First of all, the researcher has to be completely open-minded. He or she hasn't thought up a hypothesis to be tested, as is the case in other types of research. Instead, they wait for the participants in the research to inform them. As far as choosing the participants themselves is concerned, that's not really all that different from ordinary research. The criteria according to which the participants are chosen may be something as simple as the age bracket they fall into, or the researchers may select them according to their income, or they might try to find a set of people who all use a particular product, for example. But it's absolutely crucial to recruit the right people as participants. As well as the criteria I've mentioned, they have to be comfortable talking about themselves and being watched as they go about their activities. Actually, most researchers say that people open up pretty easily, maybe because they're often in their own home or workplace. So, what makes this type of research special is that it's not just a matter of sending a questionnaire to the participants. Instead, the research is usually based on first-hand observation of what they are doing at the time. But that doesn't mean that the researcher never talks to the participants. However, unlike in traditional research, in this case, it's the participant
rather than the researchers, who decides what direction the interview will follow. This means that there's less likelihood of the researcher imposing his or her own ideas on the participant. But after they've said goodbye to their participants and got back to their office, the researcher's work isn't finished. Most researchers estimate that 70 to 80% of their time is spent not on the collecting of data, but on its analysis, looking at photos, listening to recordings and transcribing them, and so on. The researchers may end up with hundreds of pages of notes. And to determine what's significant, they don't focus on the sensational things or the unusual things. Instead, they try to identify a pattern of some sort in all this data and to discern the meaning behind it. This can result in some compelling insights that can, in turn, feed back to the whole design process.
That is the end of part 4. You now have some time to check your answers.